Hello, welcome to today's build video, and you may have noticed that I'm sitting in a slightly different location. That is because this video is being released on July the 1st, which is also known as Canada Day. Now, I don't really have much of a connection with Canada beyond when I was there to visit a friend. They gave me a very large Canadian flag, so I thought that's a good enough reason to make models of Canadian planes. If you can think of a better reason, let me know in the comments. So for today's Canada Day special, we are looking at this, the Noorduyn Norseman in 1/72nd scale by Dora Wings. And there is already an unboxing video of this kit, so if you'd like to check that out, there should be a link appearing above and maybe below, and if not, just find it on the channel. Just if that's your sort of thing and you want to get yourself up to speed, this carries on from where that left off with the building of it. But without any further rambling, let's go through some stats and then start the build of this plane. This kit was first released in 2024 and according to the side of the box has 120 parts. There are 4 decal schemes. The unboxing shows them all. Basically 3 of them are yellow, 1 of them is white, and the recommended retail price at the moment in the UK is £24.99. My go-to company for a comparison is Airfix, so it's about the same sort of price as something like a de Havilland Mosquito in 1/72nd scale, or something like the de Havilland Canada Chipmunk in 1/48. Construction, of course, begins with the interior, and we're starting with the controls, which are in multiple pieces. Something you're going to see a lot of with this kit is there are a lot of parts. So on the side of the main column, you have this tiny little wheel control, I assume, and all of the chairs have all of the chairs have legs that need to be glued on separately. So you have these incredibly fiddly ones, and then these are the passenger seats, which are even more fiddly because it's got 4 of them. So there we go, 20 parts already used up just on legs for various seats. The instrument panel has this rudder pedals piece, you know what I mean, a piece for the rudder pedals glued on from behind, and then a couple of extra pieces, including this top instrument angle. We also have some instrument panels on each side of the fuselage. These are raised detailed pieces, very finely moulded. Being a new tool, thankfully there is no flash or anything negative to really say about the production quality of this. And then here we have the interior piece in one lump. You can see that some of the legs don't quite sit down properly, and I don't care enough to sort it. Also, you have to just guess the angle of the pilot seats because they sit in at an angle and there isn't any easy way of actually working it out. We do have these supports which go in here, and by lining up the fuselage half with the interior piece, you can kind of place them on where the hole. You can see there's a hole just behind the pilot's window, and it lines up with that hole there. So it's a case of lining it up and then plonking that in. Hataka Blue Line Medium Sea Grey has been thinned with some Hataka thinner and is used for the interior parts. The instructions tell you to paint some of it interior green. So I think the floor is in fact green, as is the ceiling, and then other bits grey, and this is the best grey that I found based on photos. And so we then move on to some of the first etched details to be applied to the kit. And I'm not one for adding too many etched details, but sometimes you've got to push the boat out. So as long as you're cutting on a hard surface, in this case I'm using a steel rule instead of the cutting mat. The cutting mat kind of moves when you apply pressure to it, so it inadvertently folds all of the etched pieces, which is of course not what you want. You want to keep it nice and sharp, so just chop them on a hard surface, a solid surface. For me, the steel rule will do, and these seatbelts were then folded around, I say seatbelts, you know, harnesses, and a couple of controls on the instrument panel as well, before we get to painting the rest of the interior with a mix of the colours shown on screen now. I actually opted to ignore the instructions talking about interior grey-green on certain parts because I was looking through photos of them and it seemed fine to just paint everything inside grey. Next on the cards, though, is this bulkhead, which becomes the engine mount. So this is, I believe, the firewall between the person compartment and the big spinny explodey compartment. And it is horrible. I'm not going to lie, this was not fun at all. You've got this ring glued to the bulkhead or the firewall. Then you've got these triangular, well, they're not triangular, they're 2 points, but like these acute angled sticks. Then you've got to cement the ring that holds the engine, the mount to it on there. You can't see any of this detail. I don't know why they couldn't just make it a solid part, but because of the engine sitting on top of that, as shown in the instructions here, you kind of have to get it right, and I don't think I necessarily did. Still, we'll go back to that later when we get the engine on it. There is an interior decal, as you can see here, just the one, and it is the instrument panel which goes over that raised detail. It fits beautifully, although I did use some microsole and microset decal solution just to make sure it hugs that detail nicely, even though, you know, it's pretty small. You can also at this point see the fire extinguisher just to the second man's right hand side on the wall, painted red, looking rather nice. And I've also given it a wash. My usual Basiliscanum grey from Citadel Paint has been used over the whole thing, but I just didn't show it. We then have this top piece. So you essentially create this little box. You've got the little hole for the window, as you can see there, and that is glued into the fuselage half. You then also have to line up the struts that I mentioned earlier just to get everything right. It's a little bit fiddly, but it does fit extremely well once you've lined all of those points of contact up, and you're left with what I consider to be a reasonable amount of interior detail, although of course it does open up lots of opportunities for improving this. In fact, we'll see it later, but when you put the doors in, you've got alternate doors for the panel texture inside or smooth texture inside, so they're presumably catering for other versions anyway. As part of the tooling. Still, the bulkhead is now going to go in, so that was just a dry fitting just to make sure everything lines up, then left to set. The bulkhead then goes in. I do think that it's a tiny bit wonky. I could have done better, but it's a horrible piece. Probably the least enjoyable bit, which, considering something you're going to see later, is saying something. And one final look for posterity. This is what you get before the fuselage halves go together, locking away this detail forever. So moving on to the wings, and we're going to start seeing a theme for the entire kit, which is tolerances. So it's obviously a high wing monoplane. You've got the top of the wing is one piece, and then you glue the two undersides of the wing surfaces onto that. And I feel that the tolerances are just a bit too tight. Everything squeezed up against the end to make sure there's no seam. It looked perfect. It clearly was designed like that. But it was one heck of a squeeze when I tried to get it onto the fuselage later. And here, this bottom piece, which is where the undercarriage mounts are, again, it looks nice, it fits very, very smooth, but I did have to sand down a fair bit of plastic just to get it to sit there. And I think a lot of the pieces all suffered from the same thing of just being a tiny bit too tight. You see me here gluing in the clear pieces, and by the way, I will just mention, yes, I'm using Contactor to do clear parts. Yes, that is a bit risky, but I've done enough of this to know how to reduce the risk of getting fingerprints on it, and Contactor will ultimately bond it very, very nicely. It will keep it absolutely perfect. However, there's the risk that if you run some glue somewhere you shouldn't, you'll get a fingerprint. So I would recommend not doing this and actually using glue and glaze or something like that. I, however, chose not to. But all of these clear pieces required fettling just to get them to fit, which is a little bit annoying. It's not difficult, it's just a bit annoying. And when the wing piece sits on top like this, you see I'm struggling. I'm having to really clip it in, and there is a bit of a dihedral on the wings, which I don't think should be there. It's a little bit too angular, and it's just because of those tolerances. We now have a missing piece, which is this one here. It's described as paint C, paint colour C, but you see it doesn't actually have a part number. C48 goes on to C17 with this ring on it. Well, there isn't a ring. It just isn't there. It doesn't exist. Clearly not very useful. And here we also have a mistake on the instructions because part D6 has the cap for the exhaust on the wrong side. So yeah, this kit wasn't the easiest to build. I mean, obviously it's not difficult, but just be aware that sometimes what it's saying is not necessarily true. And another feature of this kit, a common theme of this kit, is the engine. Now, I didn't show much of the filming of it because it's incredibly fiddly. It's, I believe, 15 parts, even when you factor in that missing one. It's 15 parts, and they all have to go very, very precisely. And, of course, as I've already mentioned, they have to be glued onto this incredibly spindly frame. Now, thankfully, you can kind of just wedge it in the cowling a little bit and get away with it, but it is too many parts. There must have been a better way of making that engine than to break it down that much. But still, I've not filmed me putting the clear parts, the clear doors in. I can't remember why, I just didn't. And here we got the struts for the wings and a few other final details before we go in towards the painting stage. Another addition in this kit are paint masks. That's right, Dora Wings have given you paint masks as well, and it's not very easy to actually see the pieces. It's a very weird colour, and they're translucent, so once you put them on it's a bit weird, but they supplied them, so I will fit them. So all of the clear parts, every one of them is covered by one of these paint masks. Interesting to know, I say interesting, just something you might want to be aware of, they don't give you masks for the wheels, so it's just the windows. And with that in place, everything was primed in Halford's white primer. I will rant about this very shortly, but for now it gives it a base for this, the RLM 04 yellow from Model Air. This colour is, it says at the bottom of these paint pots what they're recommended for, and it's actually recommended by Vallejo for not only RLM 04 but also REF, Trainer Yellow, and United States Chrome Yellow. So pretty much any yellow you want from the Second World War, which is kind of a not very bright yellow, a bit orangey, this is your paint. It's one of the best, most versatile Vallejo paints in the range, in my opinion. And being an airbrush ready paint, it was just chucked straight into my gallery airbrush, affiliate link down below, and just sprayed over the entire white base. I also, you may have seen it in the corner earlier, primed the etched sprue. Everything else on the sprue needed to be yellow, so I thought it was just convenient to do that. I tend to leave off fiddly parts as much as possible because, well, they're fiddly and they will break. It's a very simple scheme, just being overall yellow, but it did take a few coats. In fact, I believe I left it to dry for a couple of days and then went over again and left it a couple of days again, and then a third coat to really get the opacity that I wanted from the yellow. No problems with the airbrush or the paint. Now we have decals, and it's something that I don't really like. You see here, they're all over the place. You've got the registration codes, the serial numbers and stuff in different places, so you really have to cut around random sections rather than just a block. It is one of the things that you tend to see that separates the bigger brands like Tamiya or Airfix or Revell from the smaller brands like Dora Wings. It's obviously just easier to just chuck a load of stuff and not think about it, but just from a user point of view, this isn't as intuitive and convenient as it could be. But of course the important thing with decals is how easy they are to apply and how good they look on the finished product. Having not made much Dora Wings before, this is a bit of a new experience for me, and I'm happy to say that they are perfectly fine. They didn't break at all. I think I only had problems with one of them, and that was probably a user error more than anything else. And the registration is fine, the clarity is fine, everything about them absolutely fine. There were some fiendishly small ones, so small in fact that I had to take a picture, zoom right in just to work out what they said and whether they were upside down or not. So as far as I know, all of the decals are actually the correct way up this time, because I have fallen for that before on a few models. Like everything else in the kit, the undercarriage is provided in more parts than it probably needs to be, but hey ho, again, as long as the end result is there, it doesn't matter too much. These are yellow, however that's just because of some over bleed, if you like, when I was spraying all the extra parts on the sprue. They will be painted silver, as they should. Well, I say silver, aluminium, whatever, a metallic colour. And the wheel is of course also in two halves, and because this is the scheme on the box, scheme A, it has this tiny little decal here that I've put on separately, so it was still on the sprue, painted it yellow, put the little red decal on. And now we go back to this etched frame, and we have the control pulleys, I want to call them pulleys, the linkages between the ailerons and the main wing. By spraying them still on the etched frame, it was going to be a case of just cut them off, dunk them in glue, put them on. You can see here the ones on the wing. There are indentation marks over any parts, any areas of the kit where there's going to be these tiny little etch bits. So you had those tiny little lifting frames at the back, these fiendishly small things towards the nose. There's a lot of them. I'm amazed, but somehow I managed to apply every single one of them. Not one of them was lost during construction. Admittedly, a few of them fell off about 5 times after I first put them on because, well, it's incredibly difficult to pick this kit up without touching a bit of detail, but somehow they are all still attached. Right, that's it. That's more or less it. So this is the end result. Look, I'm starting with the tiny bit of etch detail near the lifting hook underneath the decal. Looks absolutely fantastic. We've got the injection molded step underneath the door for the passengers. Oh, what do you think, people? I love the end result of this. Now, bear in mind that this is quite cruel. This is me doing close-ups on an aircraft which is 72nd scale. A lot of these seam lines that you can see like that on the wing are not visible to the naked eye normally. I really love it. I must say, even though there were moments where this kit was very stressful, I'm really happy with the end result. The key thing to remember is that this is not your mainstream mass-produced kit. It's not going to fall together like an Airfix kit, so there are certain things that they've etched rather than moulding in, which is an easier way of doing it. But for 25 quid, it's basically buying a detail set with the kit anyway. I've also just noticed that I didn't at this point put the glazing in for the for the landing lights or the marker lights on the bottom of the wing. Ignore that, we'll pretend we didn't. Now, I wanted to have a little rant about the primer. So whilst you're admiring the final result revolving, the primer that I was using, as I mentioned, was Halford's white primer. I started using this several years ago and it was absolutely fine, no problems whatsoever. They must have changed the formula because now it has a tendency to peel off. And when I moved the masking tape, because I masked the anti-glare panel or anti-flash panel, for example, when I moved the and the black on the inside of the wings, underneath the wings, when I took the tape off, it took some of the yellow paint off as well, and it's the same with the paint masks for the canopy. That is obviously not a fault with the kit, but if you see any parts that look like I've brush painted it, that was just me trying to patch it up afterwards. Thankfully, it was mostly confined to underneath the wings where there are paint issues. The yellow paint itself, it's always a difficult thing to get right because opacity is never great with yellow. I do like this particular paint, as I mentioned, the Model Air RLM04. I think it looks about right, and I think it really stands out. I've never experimented with pre-shading on a yellow aircraft because I'm always just so scared that the yellow won't cover it properly and it's just going to end up with this horrible thick mess. So one day I will experiment a little bit more. The detail on this aircraft, the actual moulded detail, the panel lines and things, are incredibly fine. So adding a yellow paint, which is then quite thick, means that you probably wouldn't get much of it wouldn't be easy to get a good result with a panel liner. Not that that's really something that I normally deal with. We don't have any rigging, thankfully, on this, but of course we do have those etched parts. So overall, this is by no means a starter kit. This will require a bit more experience. If you've made quite a few kits, you're comfortable with it, and you've not used any etched parts before, this is probably a good way of starting, because some of them are so small that you just really don't have to worry about them whatsoever. And the ones that aren't that small are good practice for it. They've given you correct indentations for where they need to go, so it's quite easy, and very clear instructions. Although, of course, as I mentioned, there are a couple of instances where the instructions aren't quite right, but you tend to get that with all manufacturers at some stage or the other. So again, as long as you're just reading what you're doing rather than jumping in ahead and asking questions later, shouldn't prove a problem to most intermediate modelers. Regular viewers will know that I like a more interesting aircraft, something a bit obscure or unusual, and this absolutely fits the bill, and I think Dora Wings have done a fantastic job. I would be keen to build the old Matchbox kit, so let me know if that's something that interests you. I can't imagine it's going to be anywhere near as finessed as this, but it's certainly something that I'd be interested in, and let me know if this is a kit that you've bought and built, and if you think what I say is more or less your experience as well. So just to summarise, I think this is a really nice kit. It does suffer from a little bit of over-engineering in certain parts like the engine, and of course it's got lots of etched bits and paint masks and things, so it's far from a basic model, but for the price I think you get yourself a good deal. Which brings me then to a rating, because sometimes I just like rating a model. So the Dora Wings Norseman Mark whatever in 1/72 scale, I give a solid out of 10. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you disliked it, give it a thumbs down, but I'm surprised you're still watching this far. And if you haven't subscribed already, but you did get this far, then by all means, please also subscribe, as it really helps the channel out. And you could even become a channel member, like the people appearing on screen, who help fund things like this, which was technically free, and I went before the YouTube channel was created, but next time I go somewhere, I could come back with a flag, and it could be your small contribution each month that bought that flag. And that sounds like a good deal. And today's video we are looking at the... Shit, I knew it was going to happen. One of the etched details just fell off. So I've deliberately left this bit of filming till last because it is so horrendously fragile. I suspected this would happen. There's a very different floor monster that's got this.